I moved 3,300 miles away without telling my family. For 2 years, nobody called me until my sister needed a babysitter. My mother left 63 voicemails in one weekend calling me selfish. I sent back one email. When they opened it, the entire family went no contact with each other. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. My name is Alana, and I am 31 years old. I live in a sleek penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle, which is a fortress of peace I built entirely on my own. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights reflected off the dark waters of the Puget Sound. Inside, the only thing glowing was my phone screen. It was vibrating aggressively across my marble kitchen island. The caller identification flashed a name I had actively ignored for 24 months. Vivian, my mother. I sat on my leather bar stool swirling a glass of expensive red wine and watched the missed call notification join the others. 62 missed calls. 62 frantic digital attempts to drag me back into the emotional quicksand of my family in Miami. I did not pick up the phone. I simply took a slow sip of my wine and waited for the inevitable voicemail notification to pop up. Within seconds it did. Voicemail number 63. I pressed the speaker button and set the phone down on the cool marble. My mother's voice filled my quiet sanctuary, bringing with it the suffocating humidity of my childhood. Her tone was a calculated mixture of heavy church guilt and absolute unearned entitlement. Alana, I do not care what corner of the country you are hiding in, she began, her voice sharp and breathless. Trent and your sister Sydney booked a luxury anniversary trip to the Maldives for next week. Their nanny just quit without notice. You need to buy a ticket and fly down to Miami tonight to watch their 3 children. You have no husband and no real responsibilities. You just sit on a computer all day. Sydney is overwhelmed. Trent works hard to provide for her. Do your duty to this family for once in your life. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I sat there in the silence that followed, feeling the familiar ghost of a headache forming behind my eyes. Years ago, a message exactly like that would have sent me into an absolute panic. I would have scrambled to check flight prices, apologizing profusely for my absence, shrinking myself to fit perfectly into the tiny box they had assigned me. The box labeled free help. The box reserved for the dark-skinned, nerdy sister who was supposed to worship the ground her light-skinned, charismatic sister walked on. But I was not that scared girl anymore. I did not cry. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. What my mother Vivian did not know was that I did not just sit on a computer all day. I was a senior forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud. I spent my days dismantling multi-million-dollar embezzlement schemes for federal task forces. I ripped apart financial lies for a living. The idea that I would abandon my high-level career to change diapers so my sister could post bikini pictures in the Indian Ocean was genuinely laughable. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. It had been completely dormant on my end for 2 whole years. I tapped the keyboard and sent a single word. No. I set the phone back down. It took exactly 4 seconds for the digital explosion to begin. The screen lit up with a rapid-fire barrage of text messages. My phone buzzed so violently, it nearly slid right off the edge of the counter. Sydney was the first person to attack. What do you mean, no? She texted, followed by a string of angry red emojis. You are literally ruining my life. I have been planning this aesthetic for months. You are just jealous of my success and my marriage. Stop hating on my joy just because you are bitter and alone. Then came my father, Derek. Alana, you will not speak to your mother or your sister that way. We raised you to support your family. You are being completely unreasonable. Book the flight right now. I watched the messages scroll past, reading them with clinical detachment. They were so incredibly predictable. The manipulation tactics were textbook. First came the outrageous demand, then the heavy guilt trip, and finally the vicious character assassination when I failed to immediately comply. I poured myself another splash of wine, refusing to engage. I knew exactly what was coming next. The heavy artillery. A voice note appeared in the chat. It was from Trent, my white brother-in-law. Trent was a man who loved the sound of his own voice almost as much as he loved reminding everyone of his supposed vast wealth. He masqueraded as a highly successful real estate investor and carried himself with a suffocating savior complex. My parents absolutely worshipped him because his presence gave them the country club status they so desperately craved. I tapped the play button on his voice note. Trent's voice oozed with condescension and barely disguised racial microaggressions. "Listen here, Alana." Trent said, his words dripping with a sickeningly calm superiority. "I am getting really tired of your attitude. After everything this family did for you, giving you a home, feeding you, putting up with your difficult personality, you are being a typical angry, bitter woman. Sydney deserves this vacation. I deserve this vacation. Do not be ungrateful. Just pack your bags and do what you are told for once." The war had begun, and they had no idea who they fought. The digital onslaught did not stop with Trent's condescending voice note. My phone screen continued to light up like a slot machine, paying out a jackpot of dysfunction. I watched the typing bubbles appear and disappear in the family group chat as they frantically coordinated their attack. Another audio file dropped into the thread. This one was from my younger sister, Sydney. I pressed play and the sound of her performative sobbing filled my kitchen. "Alana, how could you do this to me?" she wailed, her voice hitching with manufactured grief. "I have been planning this Maldives trip for 8 months. The entire aesthetic of my brand depends on this content. You know how hard I work to promote Black girl magic and show people that we can live a luxury lifestyle. And now you are deliberately trying to sabotage my blessing because you are jealous. You want me to be stuck at home changing diapers while you sit in your lonely apartment. It is so toxic, Alana. You need to heal your heart and help your sister." I actually laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of her words. Sydney had built a modest social media following by pretending to live a life of boundless wealth. She constantly weaponized cultural buzzwords to justify her intense narcissism. To her, my refusal to be an unpaid babysitter across the country was a direct attack on her personal brand. She viewed her children as props for her online image, and viewing me as the hired help was just another way for her to maintain her delusion of grandeur. Before I could even process the absurdity of Sydney's performance, a massive block of text arrived from my father Derek. "You will not disrespect this family." He wrote, his words dripping with the same rigid authority he had used to terrorize us as children. "Your mother asked you for a simple favor, and instead of showing gratitude, you throw a tantrum. Sydney and Trent are doing important things. They represent this family well. You are 31 years old, and what do you have to show for it? No husband, no children, just a stubborn refusal to submit to the natural order of things. You will book the next flight out of Seattle. You will apologize to your mother and your brother-in-law, and you will do exactly what you are told. Do not test me, Alana." I read his words twice, letting the familiar sting wash over me and then quickly dissipate. My father had always been a passive participant in my mother's cruelty. But whenever Trent was involved, he suddenly found his spine. He worshipped the ground Trent walked on, treating his white son-in-law like some sort of wealthy savior who had elevated our family status. To my father, defying Trent was a sin worse than anything else. He was a man who measured his own worth by his proximity to Trent's supposed wealth and influence. I placed my wine glass on the counter and finally rested my fingers on the keyboard. I was ready to type out a clinical, devastating response that would shut them all down. I was going to tell them that my life was none of their concern and that they could hire a stranger to watch their children. But before I could hit send, the chat bubbled again. It was a direct message from Trent. He had bypassed the group chat entirely, sending the text straight to my personal number. I opened it, expecting more threats or racial microaggressions masked as familial advice. Instead, what I read made my blood run absolutely cold. Trent wrote that I needed to listen carefully. He said he was only going to say this once. He told me that I owed him. He claimed that when my dad went completely broke and could not afford my college tuition, he was the one who bailed him out. He explicitly stated that he paid for my education out of his own pocket because our family was drowning. He told me I owed him my entire life and my career. He demanded that I get on that plane tonight, or he would make sure everyone knew exactly what an ungrateful charity case I really was. I stopped breathing. My hands, which had been perfectly steady all evening, suddenly froze over the digital keyboard. I stared at the screen, reading his words over and over again until the letters blurred together. Trent paid for my college tuition. A cold, heavy silence settled over my apartment. The ambient noise of the Seattle traffic outside seemed to completely vanish. My mind, a highly trained forensic instrument, immediately began pulling up the financial archives of my own life. I went to college on a partial academic scholarship. The rest of it, the remaining $60,000, was entirely funded by predatory student loans that I took out under my own name. I worked 3 jobs during those 4 years. I served tables until 2 in the morning. I tutored freshmen in statistics, and I cleaned the university library on weekends. I lived on instant noodles and sleep deprivation. After I graduated, I lived in a microscopic studio apartment for 5 years, throwing every spare dollar I earned at that debt, until I finally paid it off myself exactly 3 years ago. My parents never gave me a single dime for my education. They told me they could not afford it and that building character through struggle was good for me. So if Trent actually gave my father money to pay for my college tuition, where did that money go? My father had claimed he was broke. He had accepted a massive bailout from his wealthy son-in-law under the explicit guise of paying for my education, but I never saw a penny of it. I thought about the timeline. 10 years ago, my father suddenly bought a brand new luxury vehicle, and my mother started wearing designer clothes to church. They told everyone the manufacturing business had a record quarter. They paraded their new wealth around Miami, while I was 3,000 miles away crying over textbooks because my card declined at the grocery store. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They had stolen my supposed college fund to finance their lifestyle and allowed Trent to hold that phantom debt over my head for a decade. The forensic accountant inside me woke up, stretching its limbs. The anger I felt moments ago evaporated completely, replaced by a sharp clinical thrill. Liars always make the mistake of talking too much. Trent had just handed me the thread, and all I had to do was pull it. If Trent did not pay my tuition, what did my father do with that bailout money? Or more importantly, if Trent was supposedly this massive real estate tycoon, why was he holding a decade-old favor over my head just to secure free childcare? Wealthy men do not obsess over past charity unless they are currently desperate. The math was not adding up. And if there is one thing I know how to do, it is make the math make sense. I cracked my knuckles and adjusted the brightness on my screen. I closed the messaging app. I did not reply to Trent. I did not reply to my father or my mother or my crying sister. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the public financial registry for the state of Florida. It was time to find out exactly who Trent really was and what my family had been hiding for the past 10 years. To understand why the realization of stolen money hit me so hard, you have to understand exactly why I packed a single bag and left Miami 2 years ago. My departure was not a dramatic crying fit or a sudden burst of teenage rebellion. It was a cold calculation born on the most humiliating Thanksgiving of my life. The scene of the crime was Trent and Sydney's massive suburban mansion. It was a sprawling property with a pristine pool and towering white columns that my parents bragged about to anyone who would listen. They constantly claimed Trent bought it in cash because that was the narrative he sold them to maintain his image as a real estate mogul. My mother, Vivian, had invited 40 members of her church congregation to the house that day. She wanted to show off her successful golden daughter and her wealthy white son-in-law to the entire community. She needed the pastor and the judgmental church aunties to see that her family had finally made it to the top of the social ladder. But an event for 40 people requires an immense amount of labor, and my family had zero intention of paying for a catering service. While Sydney drifted through the air-conditioned living room in a custom silk dress, taking endless selfies for her aesthetic lifestyle brand, I was trapped in the sweltering kitchen. I had been there since 5 in the morning. I basted the massive turkey I prepared, the countless side dishes I managed the ovens, and I served as the unpaid executive chef for a party I did not even want to attend. My mother had volunteered me for this role without asking because to her, a single woman with a corporate job had no real value unless she was serving the family. The heat from the double ovens made my hair stick to my forehead in wet, uncomfortable strands. My back ached from standing on the hard tile floor for 10 consecutive hours. Every time I stepped out of the kitchen to carry a heavy hot platter to the dining room, my mother would snap her fingers and tell me to hurry up. Sydney would casually pose near the food spread, acting like she had spent all day laboring over the stove whenever a church member walked by to compliment the meal. When I asked my father, Derek, to help me carry the heavy roasted turkey out of the oven, he just waved me off. He said he was busy talking business with Trent in the living room. The business talk was just my father nodding eagerly while Trent explained basic concepts my father barely understood. Around 3 in the afternoon, the heavy mahogany front door opened and a new group of guests arrived. It was not more church members. It was a group of Trent's friends from his exclusive country club. They walked in wearing expensive loafers and casual linen shirts, looking completely out of place among my mother's traditional church crowd. Trent puffed out his chest immediately, switching into his wealthy host persona. He loved having an audience to witness his supposed success. He walked over to Sydney, grabbing her by the waist and pulling her close. I was walking out of the kitchen at that exact moment, carrying a massive silver tray loaded with heavy crystal water glasses and a pitcher of ice water. I was sweating, wearing a stained apron over my clothes, my arms shaking slightly from the physical exhaustion of the day. Trent intercepted his friends in the middle of the grand foyer. He pointed to Sydney and introduced her loudly to the group of white men, calling her his exotic queen. His friends chuckled with that casual, polite racism that my family always chose to blindly ignore in exchange for the illusion of status. Then Trent's eyes landed on me. He looked me up and down, taking in my messy hair, my stained apron, and the heavy tray of water glasses I was hauling across the room like a pack mule. Trent smirked and gestured lazily in my direction with his expensive drink glass. He told his friends not to worry about finding the bar because the domestic help would take care of their empty glasses. He literally called his own sister-in-law the domestic help in front of his wealthy country club buddies. He reduced my entire existence, my master's degree, my corporate career, my sheer physical exhaustion from cooking their entire holiday meal into a racist, classist punchline just to make his friends laugh. I froze in the middle of the foyer, the heavy tray cutting into my palms. I expected my father to step in and defend his eldest daughter. I expected my mother, who preached about family loyalty and respect every single Sunday, to correct him. Instead, my mother let out a loud, shrill laugh. She actually laughed along with the joke. She patted Trent's shoulder and told his friends that I was just helping out because I had nothing better to do with my lonely life. My father chuckled from his leather chair, taking a sip of his bourbon, completely submitting to the disrespect, because challenging his rich son-in-law was entirely out of the question for a man so obsessed with wealth. They sold me out for a few seconds of approval from a man who despised them. My hands began to tremble violently. It was not from sadness or humiliation, but from a sudden blinding rage that cleared my mind of any remaining familial obligation. The heavy silver tray of crystal glasses slipped from my grip. It was not an accident. My fingers simply stopped wanting to hold up their heavy burdens anymore. The tray hit the marble floor with a deafening crash. Thick crystal shattered into hundreds of jagged pieces, sending ice and cold water flying in every direction across the pristine floor. The loud noise silenced the entire house immediately. The church members stopped their gossiping. Trent's friends jumped back to avoid the splashing water. The music playing over the sound system suddenly seemed painfully loud in the dead quiet room. I stood there staring at the broken glass, completely indifferent to the mess. The silence was abruptly broken by the sharp, aggressive clicking of Sydney's expensive heels on the wet marble floor. She marched over to me, pushing past the shocked guests. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered fury. She did not ask if I was cut by the flying glass. She did not care that I had been cooking for her guests for 10 hours straight. Her eyes darted apologetically to Trent's wealthy friends and then fixed on me with absolute hatred for ruining her perfect aesthetic moment. She stepped right into the puddle of ice water, ignoring the shards of broken crystal that grazed her designer shoes. She raised her hand, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face, her chest heaving with rage as she prepared to make a scene that would forever change the trajectory of my life. The illusion of our happy family had just shattered as completely as the glasses on the floor, and the true nightmare was only just beginning to unfold in front of 40 silent witnesses. Sydney stood over the broken glass with her hands shaking in performative rage. She held a full glass of expensive red wine in her right hand. Without a single word of warning, she thrust her arm forward and threw the entire contents of the glass directly at my chest. The dark red liquid splashed across my white shirt, soaking through the thin fabric and dripping down my apron. The gasp from the church members echoed in the large foyer. I stood completely still, watching the red droplets fall onto the wet marble floor, mingling with the shattered crystal. My mother Vivian did not scold Sydney for assaulting me. Instead, she lunged forward and grabbed my arm. Her fingernails dug into my bare skin with bruising force. She leaned in close so only I could hear her venomous whisper. She told me to apologize to Trent immediately for ruining the mood and embarrassing the family in front of his important guests. I slowly turned my head to look at my father Derek. He was staring at a painting on the far wall, deliberately avoiding my eyes. He surrendered his duty as a father to submit to the wealth of his white son-in-law. That was the exact moment the invisible chain tethering me to my family snapped. There was no dramatic screaming match. There were no tears of betrayal or begging for basic human decency. I simply looked at my mother's hand gripping my arm and pulled myself free with a sharp jerk. I reached behind my back and untied the stained apron. I let it fall to the floor, landing heavily on the broken glass and spilled wine. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, leaving a faint streak of red across my cheek. I did not look at Sydney. I did not look at Trent. I turned around and walked straight toward the heavy mahogany front door. My mother hissed my name, telling me to come back to the kitchen and clean up my mess. I opened the door and stepped out into the humid Miami evening air, leaving the door wide open behind me. I walked down the long paved driveway without looking back once. The sounds of the party faded away, replaced by the loud chirping of Florida cicadas. The drive back to my small rented apartment was completely silent. I did not turn on the radio. I did not cry. My mind was incredibly clear and coldly rational. The absolute disrespect I had endured for 3 decades had finally reached its absolute limit. I walked into my bedroom and pulled a single black suitcase from the top shelf of my closet. I did not pack any sentimental items. I left behind the family photo albums, the cheap birthday gifts, and the generic holiday cards. I only packed professional clothing, my laptop, important legal documents, and basic survival necessities. I moved through the apartment with the precision of a machine. Anything that did not fit inside that one suitcase was left exactly where it was. I stripped off the wine-stained shirt and threw it directly into the kitchen trash can. I put on a clean black sweater and called a rideshare service to take me to the airport. As I walked out of my apartment complex for the very last time, I paused by the metal storm grate on the corner of the street. I held my apartment key and the spare key to my parents' house in the palm of my hand. The metal felt cold against my skin. I opened my fingers and dropped them both through the heavy metal slots. I heard them clink against the concrete walls far below, splashing into the dark water forever out of my reach. I boarded a red-eye flight to Seattle that exact same night. I sat in the dark cabin, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of the window. I watched the neon city lights of Miami shrink into tiny glowing dots before disappearing entirely into nothingness. I was leaving behind a family that treated me like a free domestic servant. I was leaving behind the constant racial microaggressions, the blatant colorism, and the suffocating religious hypocrisy. I was finally choosing myself. For 2 entire years after that flight, I existed as a ghost to them. They never called to ask if I landed safely. They never emailed to see if I was alive. They only remembered my phone number when they desperately needed free childcare for their luxury anniversary vacation. The memory of that red wine soaking into my shirt faded away as the cold digital reality of the present washed over me. I was sitting in my stunning Seattle penthouse staring at the silent group chat on my glowing phone screen. Trent had just claimed he paid my college tuition when my father went broke. The sheer audacity of his transparent lie was the final nail in their collective coffin. He wanted to play a game of debt and obligation with a woman who mapped financial crimes for a living. I pushed the half-empty wine glass away from me and pulled my heavy silver laptop toward the center of the marble island. The bright screen illuminated my face in the dark, quiet kitchen. I am a senior forensic accountant. I spend my entire professional life hunting down hidden assets, exposing shell companies, and tracking fraudulent wire transfers for federal financial investigations. I know exactly how to make the numbers tell the undeniable truth. If Trent was truly a massive real estate mogul with enough liquid cash to bail out my father 10 years ago, there would absolutely be a digital paper trail. Rich men always leave a trail. It was finally time to find out what my arrogant white brother-in-law really did for a living and where my father's money actually went. The digital hunt for the ultimate truth officially starts right now, tonight. The glow of my laptop screen reflected off the marble island, casting long shadows across my silent Seattle kitchen. I pulled up the official website for the Florida Division of Corporations. My fingers flew across the keyboard with muscle memory that came from years of dismantling corporate fraud. I typed in the name my arrogant brother-in-law used to sign every obnoxious holiday card. I hit enter and waited for the database to populate. If you are going to claim you bailed out a grown man 10 years ago and paid a $60,000 tuition bill out of pocket, you better have the corporate footprint to back it up. Wealthy men always leave a digital trail of their assets. They cannot help themselves. The search results yielded 3 different limited liability companies registered under his name. I clicked on the primary one, the real estate investment group he constantly bragged about at church dinners and country club outings. The company that supposedly funded my sister's pristine suburban life. I pulled up the annual reports and the articles of organization. It took me exactly 4 minutes to realize the entire operation was a ghost town. The principal address was not a sleek downtown office building or even a modest commercial suite. It was a virtual mailbox registered to a rundown strip mall in Boca Raton. I muttered under my breath as I cross-referenced the registered agent. It was just a cheap legal service you can hire online for $50 a month. I dug deeper, accessing the public commercial property records for the entire state of Florida. I ran his name, his aliases, and his business entities through the database looking for deeds, titles, commercial leases, or anything that would indicate he owned the empire he claimed to manage. The system returned 0 active commercial assets. None. He did not own a single apartment complex or commercial plaza. He did not even own a vacant lot. His massive real estate empire was literally just a piece of paper filed with the state to make him look important. He was running a hollow shell company designed entirely for optics. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart beating with that familiar cold rhythm of a hunt. If he had no corporate assets, where was his cash flow coming from to support a family of 5? I switched tabs, opening the Miami-Dade County Public Court records. If a man does not have assets, he usually has liabilities. I searched his name in the civil dockets. The screen flooded with active cases. My eyes widened as I scrolled through the endless list of litigation, dragging my cursor down line after line of financial ruin. There were 3 pending lawsuits from independent contractors claiming breach of contract and unpaid wages for minor house flipping projects that went belly up months ago. He owed roofers and plumbers thousands of dollars that he simply refused to pay. But that was not even the worst of it. I pulled up the financial judgments filed against him by major national credit card companies. He was currently drowning in over $150,000 of unsecured consumer debt. He had maxed out multiple premium credit cards to maintain the illusion of wealth. I opened the individual case files, reading the itemized statements that the banks had submitted to the court as evidence. The designer suits he wore to my parents' church, the leased luxury cars he parked in the driveway, the expensive dinners where he treated me like the domestic help, it was all funded by predatory credit lines that were actively suing him for default. I scrolled through the banking ledgers he had submitted during one of his failed settlement hearings. The sheer volume of his reckless spending was laid out in stark black and white. He was paying minimum balances on high-yield accounts just to keep the creditors at bay for another 30 days. He was taking out new personal loans just to pay off the interest on the old ones. It was a classic debt spiral. The man who loved to lecture me about hard work and responsibility was a financial fraud. He built his entire arrogant persona on borrowed money that he had no intention of ever paying back. I stared at the digital records, feeling a profound sense of disgust. This was the white savior my parents worshipped. This was the man my father bowed down to. A man who used a fake corporate title to make my father feel inferior, while simultaneously drowning in his own incompetence. The irony was incredibly bitter. They treated me like an outcast because I chose to work hard and pay my own bills while they rolled out the red carpet for a con artist who was essentially stealing a living. I sat back on my bar stool and took a slow breath of the cool Seattle air. The math was screaming at me. It was entirely incompatible with reality. My sister wore custom gowns that cost $2,000. She threw massive catered parties just for social media content. Their upcoming anniversary trip to the Maldives would easily cost $20,000 or $30,000 just for the first-class flights and the overwater bungalow. If his business was a shell and he was suffocating under 6 figures of high-interest debt, with active judgments against him, how on earth was he funding my sister's extravagant lifestyle? More importantly, how did a man with a ruined credit score and 0 liquid assets supposedly bail out my father 10 years ago? Someone was lying. Someone was actively funding this pathetic charade to keep up appearances. I opened a new search terminal on my screen. My mind raced through the possibilities. If the money was not coming from his businesses, and it was not coming from his maxed-out credit cards, it had to be coming from an external source that he had quietly tapped into. I decided to run a cross-reference. I took the routing details and registered agents connected to his empty shell company, and I ran them against my parents' home address. The address of the house my father proudly claimed he paid off completely a decade ago. The search engine spun for a few long seconds, processing the query through the county property appraiser database. I watched the loading icon spin, feeling a strange knot forming in my stomach. A single match popped up on the screen. It was a recorded financial instrument filed exactly 18 months ago. I clicked on the blue hyperlink to download the public document. The page loaded slowly, revealing a standardized state form bearing official county seals and notarized signatures. A scanned PDF opened on my screen, and what I saw made the breath leave my lungs entirely. It was a home equity line of credit agreement for $400,000, secured against my parents' fully paid off Miami house. My father, Derek, had paid his mortgage in full 10 years ago. I remember the exact day he made the final payment because he threw a massive barbecue in the backyard. He stood on the patio holding the bank clearance letter with tears in his eyes, preaching to the church elders about generational wealth and leaving a permanent legacy for his black children. That 4-bedroom house in a respectable neighborhood was his crown jewel. It was his tangible proof that he had succeeded against all odds. And now, staring back at me on the glowing screen, was the absolute destruction of that legacy. I zoomed in on the bottom of the 4th page, where the notary seal was stamped into the digital paper. There were 2 signatures on the primary borrower line. The first was my father's. His handwriting looked slightly shaky and hesitant, as if the pen was too heavy for him to hold. Right beneath it, dominating the signature line with arrogant sweeping loops, was the signature of my white brother-in-law, Trent. The document listed Trent as an authorized co-signer and primary managing agent of the funds under the guise of a joint commercial real estate investment venture. The puzzle pieces violently snapped into place, painting a picture so grotesque it made my stomach turn. Trent, the supposed real estate mogul who was actually drowning in credit card debt, had manipulated my father into leveraging the only real asset our family possessed. Trent had convinced an aging, proud black man to hand over the equity of his life's work for some phantom investment opportunity. My father, desperate to maintain his proximity to Trent's perceived white wealth and eager to ensure Sydney's life looked flawless, on the internet had literally mortgaged his own retirement. He willingly gave a con artist the keys to the castle just to keep up appearances at church. That $400,000 was the actual lifeblood of Sydney's fake black girl magic aesthetic. That stolen equity was the money paying for the custom silk gowns, the catered church events, and the upcoming luxury vacation to the Maldives. They were not living off Trent's non-existent business acumen. They were draining my parents' home equity dry to fund a digital facade. And my father, who had just aggressively yelled at me in a group chat about respect and duty, was completely oblivious to the fact that his wealthy savior son-in-law had functionally bankrupted him. My chest felt tight, but the cold analytical part of my brain took over completely, pushing the anger aside. I could not just stop at the loan origination document. As a forensic accountant, I know that securing the fraudulent funds is only chapter 1 of a financial crime. The real story, the undeniable truth, is always buried in the disbursement. I needed to know exactly how fast Trent burned through $400,000 and where every single penny went. I pivoted back to the county court dockets, pulling up a specific subpoenaed bank ledger from one of Trent's credit card default lawsuits. The bank had successfully requested his business checking history for the past 24 months to prove he was hiding assets from creditors. It was a massive document containing hundreds of pages of raw transaction data. I downloaded the file and ran it through a proprietary data extraction script on my laptop, converting the raw image text into a searchable spreadsheet. I began filtering the columns, sorting by transaction size and chronological date. I watched the initial bulk wire transfer of $400,000 hit Trent's empty shell company account exactly 18 months ago. Almost immediately, the money started hemorrhaging. I saw $10,000 wired to a luxury car dealership for a down payment on a leased Mercedes. I saw $5,000 paid to a boutique travel agency. I saw endless thousands drained for fine dining, high-end retail, and country club dues. It was a textbook case of severe misappropriation of funds. He was bleeding my parents' house dry to buy social media likes for my sister. But as my eyes tracked down the columns, scrolling month by month, the chaotic numbers started to form a strange rhythmic pattern. Amidst the impulsive, reckless spending of a narcissist desperately maintaining a lie, there was a highly disciplined, highly unusual recurring transaction. I stopped scrolling. I highlighted a single row from exactly 17 months ago, which was exactly 1 month after the home equity loan was funded. It was an automated wire transfer for exactly $8,000. I scrolled down to the next month. On the first day of the month, there was another automated wire transfer for exactly $8,000. I filtered the entire spreadsheet for that specific dollar amount. My screen instantly populated with 17 identical rows. Every single month without fail, Trent was wiring $8,000 out of his business account. Even when his premium credit cards were defaulting, even when contractors were suing him for unpaid labor, that $8,000 wire transfer cleared on the first of the month. It was treated with absolute priority over everything else. A man drowning in severe debt does not reliably transfer that kind of cash unless someone is holding a metaphorical gun to his head. It was not a mortgage payment for the suburban mansion because the amounts did not match the county property tax records. It was not an auto loan or a standard utility. It was structured exactly like hush money. I looked closely at the receiving account information. The destination bank name was listed, but the account holder name was heavily obscured by the court redaction. However, the routing number and the last 4 digits of the account number were still visible in the raw metadata of the ledger. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I copied the routing number and ran a reverse trace through an institutional clearinghouse database I used for corporate audits. The digital mask peeled away and the actual registered name of the receiving account flashed onto my screen in bright green letters. It read, Vivian Grace Ministries. I literally stopped breathing. Vivian Grace Ministries was a fake philanthropic charity registered in the state of Florida. The sole director and registered agent of that non-existent charity was Vivian, my mother. My mother was receiving $8,000 of untaxed, unrecorded cash every single month directly from her white son-in-law. Trent was paying off my mother using the exact same money he had stolen from my father's home equity loan. My mother was actively bleeding her own husband dry behind his back to fund her extravagant church lady wardrobe and her lavish social events. She was taking hush money. But why was Trent paying her to keep quiet? What secret was so radioactive that a broke narcissist would prioritize an $8,000 monthly extortion payment over his own failing credit score? I dragged my cursor back to the master spreadsheet of Trent's personal expenditures. I ignored the luxury cars and the expensive dinners filtering the data exclusively for the past 9 months. I cross-referenced his debit card swipes against geographical locations in the greater Miami area. A cluster of odd charges emerged far outside his usual affluent suburban footprint. There were recurring monthly payments of $2,500 to a residential property management company in a completely different zip code. Trent was paying rent on a secret apartment across town. I dug deeper, scrutinizing his individual point-of-sale transactions near that specific zip code. My eyes widened as the ugly truth began to construct itself on my screen line by line. There were multiple charges to a specialized medical clinic. There were massive receipts from a high-end baby boutique for a crib, a stroller, and expensive infant clothing. There were frequent payments to a maternity wellness spa. My sister Sydney was not pregnant. She had been complaining in the family group chat just last week about her strict diet to maintain her influencer waistline. I stared at the screen, the cold air of my Seattle apartment washing over me. Trent had a secret apartment across town. Trent was paying for prenatal care and baby furniture. Sydney was not pregnant. So who was? I ran the address of the luxury apartment complex through the county tenant registry. It took a few minutes of digging through public utility records linked to the unit, but a name finally popped up on my screen. Madison. I cross-referenced her name with Trent's Hollow Real Estate Company on professional networking sites. There she was. A 24-year-old former administrative assistant who supposedly left his company 8 months ago to pursue other opportunities. I pulled up her public social media profiles. Her feed was entirely unsecured and filled with pictures of her standing in that exact same apartment. She was posing in front of expensive baby furniture wearing designer maternity clothes. She was holding her stomach and beaming at the camera. The caption celebrated her entering her 3rd trimester. She was 6 months pregnant with Trent's baby. The timeline made perfect 6 sense. Trent moved his pregnant 24-year-old mistress into a luxury apartment across town while playing the devoted wealthy husband to my sister. But that still left the most disturbing piece of the puzzle completely unexplained. Why was my mother Vivian receiving exactly $8,000 every single month? If Trent was hiding a mistress, why would he pay his mother-in-law? Hush money out of the stolen home equity funds. The only logical conclusion was that my mother already knew everything. I needed hard evidence. I closed the court dockets and opened a new browser window. Years ago, when I was still the designated free technical support for the family, I set up a shared cloud storage drive for my parents to back up their phones and digital documents. I never revoked my own administrative access because they never figured out how to use the system properly anyway. I logged into the master account and bypassed the 2-factor authentication using the backdoor recovery email I established a decade ago. The cloud drive was a massive digital hoarding ground of church bulletins, blurry vacation photos, and scanned tax documents. I filtered the files by the date they were uploaded, focusing strictly on the time frame exactly 17 months ago. That was the exact month when the home equity loan was signed and the $8,000 transfers began. Buried deep inside a folder labeled Church Committee Planning, I found a single audio file. It was recorded directly on my mother's phone using a voice memo app. The file name was just a string of automatic numbers and timestamps. I plugged my headphones into the laptop and pressed play. The ambient background noise of a running car engine filled my ears. My mother had deliberately recorded a conversation inside Trent's leased Mercedes. I turned up the volume and listened to the most grotesque exchange I have ever heard in my entire life. My mother's voice came through the speakers sharp and venomous. She was not acting like a loving grandmother or a devout Christian woman. She told Trent that she saw the text messages on his phone when he left it on the kitchen counter during Sunday dinner. She told him she knew all about Madison and the secret apartment across town. I braced myself, fully expecting to hear my mother demand a divorce. I expected to hear her scream at him for betraying her golden child, Sydney. I expected the righteous fury of a mother protecting her daughter. But that is not what happened at all. There was no righteous anger defending her daughter's honor. Instead, my mother let out a cold, calculated laugh. Trent was stammering and crying, begging her not to tell Sydney. He was pleading with her not to ruin his life and his reputation. My mother told him to shut his mouth. She said Sydney was accustomed to a certain lifestyle and a divorce would be an embarrassing public scandal at the church. She said she refused to be the mother of a single struggling woman because it would ruin her own image. Then my mother delivered the ultimatum that made my blood freeze in my veins. She told Trent that a scandal of this magnitude required heavy compensation. She said her church ladies were getting suspicious about why she was not donating more to the building fund, and her wardrobe needed a serious upgrade. She demanded that Trent set up a recurring wire transfer to her private charity account. She looked her cheating son-in-law dead in the eye and named her exact price. "You pay my charity $8,000 a month," she told him, "so I can keep up my status at the church and buy the things I deserve, and I will keep my mouth completely shut about your little blonde side piece." Trent sounded terrified but incredibly relieved. He agreed immediately. He told her he would get the money by taking out a commercial loan with her husband. He literally admitted to my mother right then and there that he was going to manipulate my father into mortgaging the family home to pay her extortion fee. And my mother, the woman who stood at the pulpit every Sunday preaching about moral purity and family values, simply replied that she did not care how he got the money as long as the transfer cleared by the 1st of every month. The audio file ended abruptly with the sound of a car door opening. I sat in the dark silence of my Seattle penthouse, pulling the headphones out of my ears. My hands were not shaking anymore. My heart was beating with a slow, terrifying calm. My mother had actively sold out her own daughter's marriage and her husband's financial security for designer hats and church clout. She let her husband sign away his retirement. She let her daughter sleep next to a man who was building a whole second family across town. They were all eating each other alive behind closed doors while aggressively lecturing me about family loyalty and duty. They were monsters hiding behind Sunday service smiles, and I had every single one of their receipts. I sat in the dark, illuminated only by the harsh white light of my laptop screen. The audio file had finished playing, but the sound of my mother's extortion still echoed in my quiet apartment. I opened a secure folder on my desktop and began the clinical process of assembling the execution block. I took the downloaded home equity line of credit document bearing my father's signature and Trent's fraudulent cosign. I merged it with the spreadsheet showing the $400,000 bleeding out into luxury car leases and country club dues. I saved the merged file as a PDF. I named it Derek Reverse Mortgage Fraud. Next, I took the lease agreement for the luxury apartment across town, the maternity clinic receipts, and the screenshots of the 24-year-old mistress's public social media profile holding her 6-month pregnant stomach. I bundled them together and saved the second PDF, naming it Trent Lease and Paternity Bills. Finally, I took the bank ledger showing the recurring $8,000 hush money payments and attached the audio file of my mother demanding her church fashion allowance in exchange for hiding the affair. I saved the third PDF and named it Vivian Blackmail 8,000 monthly. 3 digital bombs sitting perfectly aligned on my desktop waiting for the detonation sequence. Just as I closed the file folders, my phone began to vibrate against the marble counter. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I stared at it for a long moment, letting it vibrate. Derek had not called me directly in over 2 years. He only ever spoke to me through the family group chat when he needed to exert his authority or back up my mother's demands. I swiped the screen and accepted the call, holding the phone to my ear without saying a word. Alana, his voice came through the speaker, sounding frantic and thin. It lacked the booming authoritative resonance he used at the pulpit on Sunday mornings. He pleaded with me to tell him I was packing my bags and that I had to book the flight tonight. I listened to his ragged breathing. I did not respond immediately, letting the silence stretch out to make him sweat. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "Why are you calling me?" He let out a heavy sigh of sheer panic. He told me that Trent was furious. He said Trent was pacing the living room, claiming that I was deliberately trying to humiliate Sydney. Then my father dropped the piece of information that sealed his own fate. He told me that if I did not get on that plane and watch the kids, Trent was going to cut off his quarterly investment dividends. My grip tightened on the phone. The investment dividends. The absolute cruel genius of Trent's manipulation made me sick to my stomach. My father actually believed that the $400,000 he signed away was generating passive income in a commercial real estate venture. Trent had been paying my father tiny fractions of his own stolen home equity back to him and calling them dividends just to keep the old man completely compliant and submissive. And now Trent was weaponizing my father's own stolen money to force me into being an unpaid babysitter. My father was begging me to sacrifice my career to protect an investment that did not even exist anymore. He was completely clueless that his money had already been spent on a leased Mercedes and a pregnant 24-year-old mistress. "Dad?" I asked softly, playing the part of the confused daughter. "What dividends are you talking about?" He quickly hushed me, whispering into the receiver that it was private family business. He claimed Trent was generous enough to let him buy into a massive commercial project. He said it was the legacy he was leaving for me and Sydney. He warned me that if I did not come home and help my sister, Trent would freeze the payouts and he would lose everything he had worked for. He told me I had to do this for him because I owed this family. I closed my eyes and let out a slow, steady breath. My father was trading my dignity to save a ghost. He was willing to let Trent degrade me and treat me like domestic help just to protect his imaginary wealth. There was no saving him. There was only exposing the truth. I opened my eyes and stared at the 3 PDF files resting on my desktop. I shifted my tone completely, adopting the soft, apologetic cadence of a defeated daughter. I told him he was right. I made my voice tremble just slightly for effect, saying I was sorry for being selfish and not thinking about the bigger picture. I said family is everything, and I would do it. I promised I would watch the kids so they could go to the Maldives. I heard my father let out a massive sigh of relief on the other end of the line. He thanked God, his voice regaining a fraction of its usual arrogance. He said he knew I would finally see reason and do what was right. He added that Trent was going to be very pleased to hear this. "But there is one problem, Dad." I continued smoothly, injecting a note of corporate panic into my voice. I explained that my accounting firm was in the middle of a massive federal audit. I told him my partners would not let me take emergency personal leave just based on an email. I lied flawlessly, explaining that human resources required absolute proof of a family emergency before they would authorize my absence and release me from my current contracts. My father grumbled, clearly annoyed by the inconvenience, asking what kind of proof they needed. I smiled in the dark. I told him they needed to verify the family emergency directly with my immediate relatives. I said my corporate director needed to see that my parents and my sister were facing a legitimate crisis that required my physical presence in Miami. I told him they wanted a mandatory video conference with everyone involved. A video conference, my father repeated, sounding exasperated. He complained that they were very busy preparing for the trip that Sydney was packing, and Trent was stressed. He called it ridiculous corporate overreach. I know, Dad, I said, playing the victim perfectly, but if I just leave without their approval, they will terminate my position. I told him I would lose my job and my apartment. I just asked everyone to log onto a Zoom call for 5 minutes tonight. I told him to just smile, tell my boss that the nanny quit, and confirm that the family desperately needed me to fly down. I promised that once they saw everyone together and heard the situation, they would approve my leave, and I could book the red-eye flight. I could hear him deliberating on the other end of the line. He probably covered the microphone to explain the situation to my mother and Trent, who were likely hovering nearby. After a few muffled whispers, my father came back on the line. Fine, he snapped, telling me to send the link. But he warned me they were only doing this for 5 minutes because Trent had better things to do than talk to my human resources department. He ordered me to look presentable and not embarrass them. He confirmed they would be online tonight at 8. I told him I would send the meeting invitation to the family group chat immediately. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the marble counter. The trap was set perfectly. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and their desperate need to control me that they did not even question the logic of a corporate family audit. They just wanted to secure their free housemaid and protect their imaginary wealth. I opened the family group chat and typed out the final message. You are right. Family is everything. I will do it. Please join the Zoom link below at exactly 8 p.m. Pacific time so my corporate office can approve my emergency leave. Be there. I hit send and watched the message deliver. The chat remained completely silent. They had taken the bait without a single hesitation. I looked back at my laptop screen where the 3 financial death sentences were waiting to be opened. The timer was ticking down to 8 o'clock, and the destruction of my family was finally imminent. It is exactly 7:55 p.m. Pacific time when I sit down at my marble kitchen island. The city of Seattle is dark and quiet outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside my apartment, the air is thick with anticipation. I open my secure corporate email client and create a new message, carefully typing in the addresses for my father, my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. I take a slow breath and attach the 3 PDF files I meticulously compiled over the last few hours. The first file is named Derek Reverse Mortgage Fraud. The second is Trent Lease and Paternity Bills. The third is Vivian Blackmail, 8,000 monthly. There is no subject line. There is no polite greeting in the body of the text. There are just 3 loaded weapons waiting to be fired. I navigate to the scheduling tool on my email server and set the delivery timer for exactly 8:05 p.m. I click the Schedule Send button, watching the digital confirmation flash across my screen. The guillotine is primed and the rope is in my hands. At exactly 8 p.m., I open the Zoom application and click Start Meeting. The black screen flashes for a fraction of a second before the connection establishes over the thousands of miles between us. 4 rectangular video feeds immediately merge into one large wide shot. My family is sitting together in the expansive living room of the Miami suburban mansion. The very same house my father proudly thinks he owns free and clear, but is actually drowning in Trent's hidden debt. They have arranged themselves perfectly for the camera, like a promotional photo for a toxic reality television show. They are all gathered around an expensive white leather sectional sofa. My mother Vivian is wearing a crisp church-appropriate blouse, her hair perfectly styled, holding a crystal flute of cheap champagne. My father Derek is sitting rigid next to her, trying desperately to look like the authoritative patriarch of a wealthy family. Sydney is lounging lazily against Trent, wearing a designer silk robe that she definitely bought with my father's stolen retirement equity. Trent is sitting in the center with his legs spread wide, asserting his dominance over the room. He rests his arm casually across the back of the sofa, holding a highball glass of dark amber liquor. They look like the perfect affluent American family ready to grant an audience to their struggling inferior relative. They are already smiling. They are already gloating. There is no human resources director on the call tonight. I say, my voice perfectly flat, playing the part of the compliant broken daughter one last time. I tell them my corporate office decided a direct family confirmation was not necessary after all, and that they approved my emergency leave based on my word alone. I tell them I am preparing to book the red-eye flight to Miami. Trent takes a slow, deliberate sip of his drink and smirks directly at the camera lens. "Glad you finally learned your place, Alana," he says, his words dripping with that familiar, suffocating, arrogant superiority. He tells me it is about time I stopped being so incredibly difficult and started contributing to the people who took care of me all these years. He chuckles, a low grating sound that makes my skin crawl, and adds a final directive. He says that while I am down there babysitting his 3 kids, I need to make absolutely sure I scrub the back patio before they get back from the Maldives. He literally tells me not to be lazy about cleaning the pool deck because he is paying good money for this luxury vacation and expects to come home to a spotless house. Sydney leans into the frame, rolling her eyes and adjusting her silk robe. "And please, Alana," she whines, running a manicured hand through her hair. "Do not wear your cheap, depressing Seattle clothes around my kids. They are used to a very specific high-end aesthetic, and I do not want them picking up your lonely single woman energy while we are gone. Just try to look somewhat presentable if any of the neighbors happen to stop by the house. We have a reputation to maintain in this neighborhood, and you always look like you just rolled out of bed." My mother. Vivian nods vigorously in agreement, taking a delicate sip of her champagne to wash down the cruelty. She tells me I should be thanking God on my knees that Trent is generous enough to let me stay in his beautiful suburban home. She actually says that maybe being around a successful marriage and a real man will rub off on me and cure my bitter attitude toward life. My father Derek just sits there looking immensely relieved that his imaginary investment dividends are safe for another quarter. He ignores their blatant disrespect and simply tells me to book the flight and not cause any more trouble for the family. I watch the way Trent smiles when he calls me difficult. It is the smile of a man who builds his entire ego by stepping on the necks of black women. He views me as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. He truly believes his whiteness and his fake money grant him supreme authority over my time and my dignity. Sydney basks in his proximity, tearing down her own sister to elevate her fraudulent internet persona. She thinks her proximity to him shields her from reality. Vivian hides behind her church attendance, using religion as a weapon to enforce compliance while completely ignoring the active rotting decay of her own family. And Derek sacrifices his oldest daughter to protect his own fragile pride. They are a perfect ecosystem of toxicity, and I am about to introduce a lethal virus into their environment. I sit in my penthouse 3,300 miles away, watching them perform this pathetic, disgusting charade. They are so incredibly arrogant, so utterly blinded by their own narcissism and fake wealth, that they cannot see the trap closing tightly around their throats. They truly think they have won. They think they have successfully bullied the dark-skinned, nerdy sister into submission once again. They think they are completely untouchable in their suburban fortress. I do not argue with them. I do not raise my voice to defend my wardrobe or demand basic human respect. I simply reach for my glass of expensive red wine and take a slow, deliberate sip. The taste is rich and complex, a perfect contrast to the cheap garbage they are spewing through the screen. I do not break eye contact with the camera. I watch the digital clock in the corner of my laptop menu bar. It flips silently from 8:04 to 8:05. Exactly on cue, a synchronized sharp chiming sound echoes loudly through the Zoom audio feed. It is the unmistakable sound of 4 different smartphones receiving a high-priority email notification at the exact same millisecond. Trent's phone buzzes aggressively on the glass coffee table. Sydney's phone lights up brightly in her lap. My mother's phone dings sharply from inside her designer purse. My father's phone vibrates heavily in his shirt pocket. The living room goes dead quiet as they all instinctively reach for their devices, annoyed by the sudden digital interruption to their gloating session. I set my wine glass down heavily on the marble island and lean forward into the camera lens. I let the cold, dead expression on my face communicate the absolute end of their reign. I just sent you guys my travel itinerary, I say, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that cuts right through the digital connection. Open the email. The room on the screen goes silent as they tap their screens. Their smug expressions morph into confusion. My father, Derek, squints at his phone, pulling reading glasses from his pocket. He taps the first attachment labeled Derek Reverse Mortgage Fraud. I watch the smartphone screen reflect off his face as the PDF file loads. When his eyes focus on the bold county seals and the massive numerical figures at the top of the document, the atmosphere in the living room shifts. I watch the exact moment my father's heart drops. His deep brown skin turns an ashen gray. His shoulders cave inward. His hand shakes so violently the phone nearly slips from his grasp. He reads the notarized home equity line of credit agreement. He looks at his own signature right next to the signature of his beloved white son-in-law. He looks at the total disbursement amount of $400,000. The money he spent his entire life working for is gone, drained into an empty shell company. Derek looks up from his phone, his chest heaving as he struggles for air. He turns slowly toward Trent on the white leather sofa. Trent's arrogant smirk has vanished. My father holds the phone out, his hand, trembling. Trent, what is this? Derek asks, his voice cracking and breaking the silence. What is this paper saying? Where is my retirement? Where is the money? Trent lunges forward and snatches the phone from my father's hand. He stares at the screen and sheer panic washes over his face. The color drains from his cheeks, leaving him terrified. The fake real estate mogul is a cornered rat caught in a trap he cannot buy his way out of. He throws the phone down onto the glass coffee table like it is burning his skin. "It is a fake document!" Trent yells, his voice pitching up into a frantic squeak. He points an accusatory finger directly at the webcam. "She is lying, Derek. She fabricated the whole thing. Alana is a psychotic hacker trying to destroy this family because she is jealous of what we have. Do not listen to a word she says. She altered numbers to make me look bad because she hates my success, and she is a lonely, bitter woman." My mother. Vivian gasps, clutching the expensive jewelry around her neck bought with stolen money. She looks at me through the screen with absolute venom. "Alana, how could you do something so evil?" she screams. "How could you forge documents to slander your brother-in-law? You are going to hell." I do not raise my voice or blink. I copy the direct link to the Miami-Dade County Public Records portal and paste it into the Zoom chat box. I hit send and a notification bell chimes on their end. I lean closer to the camera. "That is the link to the official county clerk website." I say, my voice perfectly steady and flat. I also dropped the physical address of the Public Records Office on Flagler Street in downtown Miami. You can drive down there tomorrow morning when they open at 8 a.m. Derek. You can walk right up to the clerk and request the deed history for your own house. They will hand you the exact same document with the exact same county seal and signatures. It is not a trick, Trent. It is a federal crime, and you left a paper trail. Derek looks at the chat box, then looks back at Trent. His breathing is rapid. "You told me it was a joint commercial investment." Derek whispers, his voice broken. "You told me the money was growing. You told me I was securing a legacy for my daughters. You stole my house, Trent. You stole my house." Trent is sweating now. Beads of perspiration form on his forehead. He stands up, pacing back and forth, waving his hands frantically. "Derek, you have to listen to me," he stammers, trying desperately to deploy his gaslighting tactics. "The market is just experiencing a temporary downturn. The funds are tied up in escrow. It is a complex real estate maneuver that you do not understand because you are not in the business. Alana is just a malicious idiot pulling out of context paperwork to cause drama. Suddenly, Sydney jumps up from the sofa. She inserts herself between Trent and the camera, shielding her husband with her body. She glares into the lens, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She is entirely unwilling to accept that her luxury lifestyle is funded by her father's stolen retirement. She refuses to believe her perfect white husband is a broke fraud. "You are a toxic, jealous hater," Alana Sydney screams, her voice piercing. "You have always been obsessed with ruining my life. Trent is a genius. He is building an empire for us, and you are trying to ruin his business because you are a miserable failure. You cannot stand to see my black girl magic shining. You cannot stand that I have a rich husband who treats me like a queen while you are rotting alone in Seattle. You are dead to me, Alana. Do you hear me? You are dead to me." I watch my sister scream at me, defending the very man who is actively destroying her entire existence. I watch her desperately cling to the illusion of wealth, even as the truth is staring her right in the face. I do not feel anger toward her anymore. I only feel a profound clinical satisfaction. The first bomb has detonated, perfectly shattering the foundation of their fraudulent reality. But the structural damage is not yet complete. The real devastation is waiting in the queue. I let Sydney finish her screaming fit. I wait until she stops to take a breath, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with manufactured fury. I smile. It is a cold, sharp smile that conveys absolutely zero mercy. "Sydney," I say softly, my voice cutting through the chaos in the living room like a scalpel. "Open file number 2. Sydney hesitates for a fraction of a second, but her fingers betray her. She taps the screen of her phone, opening the second attachment labeled Trent Lease and Paternity Bills. The room is still echoing with my father's heavy breathing, but all my attention is focused squarely on my sister. I watch her eyes scan the first page of the PDF document. It is the residential lease agreement for the luxury apartment across town. She reads the monthly rent amount of $2,500. She reads the signature line where her husband's name is printed clearly right next to the name of his former administrative assistant, Madison. I can actually see the exact moment the delusion shatters completely. The carefully curated internet aesthetic dissolves right off her face. She swipes to the next page in the file. These are the receipts from the high-end maternity boutique. She is reading the itemized list of expensive baby cribs, luxury strollers, and newborn clothing. Sydney is not pregnant, but the receipts clearly show Trent paying for items intended for a child, arriving in exactly 3 months. Her thumb swipes frantically to the third page, the medical billing statements from the private obstetrician clinic. She stares at the ultrasound imaging bills. The silence in the living room is so profound, I can hear the faint hum of my own refrigerator in Seattle. Sydney lets out a sound that does not even sound human. It is a raw, guttural scream that tears through the digital audio connection and forces me to turn down the volume on my laptop. She drops her phone onto the plush carpet and turns to Trent. Her hands are shaking so violently that the champagne she was holding sloshes over the rim of her crystal flute. Trent holds his hands up, palms facing outward, walking backward away from her. "Sydney, you have to let me explain," he stammers, his voice trembling with sheer terror. "It is a misunderstanding. It is a corporate expense for an employee." Sydney does not let him finish his pathetic lie. She rears back and hurls the heavy crystal champagne flute directly at his head. The glass misses his face by an inch and shatters violently against the expensive artwork hanging on the wall behind him. Expensive champagne drips down the canvas and onto the hardwood floor. "You are having a baby with your assistant!" Sydney screams, her voice cracking and breaking under the weight of total, absolute betrayal. "You moved a 24-year-old girl into a luxury high-rise while we are drowning in credit card debt. You are buying strollers while we are about to lose our cars." Trent lunges forward, grabbing Sydney's wrist to stop her from attacking him again. He physically restrains her, pushing her back down onto the white leather sectional. She thrashes against him, crying and screaming that he ruined her life and her brand. Trent turns his panicked face toward the webcam. He is sweating profusely, his perfectly styled hair now a chaotic mess. "This is a setup," he yells into the microphone, his voice cracking under the pressure of his collapsing lies. "Alana is a psychotic hacker. She manipulated these documents to destroy our marriage. She is a jealous, bitter woman trying to take away everything we built." Derek Vivian. "You cannot believe a word of this. She hacked my accounts and planted fake bills to ruin me because she is obsessed with me." My father Derek is sitting on the edge of his seat clutching his chest. He is completely paralyzed watching his daughter fight her husband while his own financial ruin still burns in his mind. The man who loved to demand respect and obedience from his daughters is entirely powerless to stop the implosion of his family. He just watches the wealthy son-in-law he worshipped wrestle with his golden child. But my mother Vivian reacts differently. She does not rush forward to comfort Sydney. She does not yell at Trent for betraying her favorite daughter or demand that he let go of her wrists. Instead, she stands up, smoothing down her pristine church blouse and marches directly toward the computer screen. She ignores the shattered glass on the floor and the crying woman on the couch. Vivian leans her face close to the camera lens. Her eyes are wide with that familiar, toxic, righteous indignation she uses to control the congregation every Sunday. "Alana, how could you do this to your sister?" she screams, pointing a sharp, manicured finger at the webcam. "How could you deliberately tear this family apart out of pure spite and jealousy? You dug up these horrible lies just to ruin a beautiful marriage because you cannot find a man of your own. You should be ashamed of yourself exposing private family matters like this. You are a wicked, spiteful child, and you are going to destroy Sydney's mental health just to prove a point. You are trying to break the holy covenant of marriage because you are empty inside." I sit in my quiet penthouse watching my mother try to spin the narrative one last time. She is desperately trying to make me the villain to protect the fragile social image of her family. She is weaponizing her maternal guilt, hoping I will break down, apologize, and log off the call. She wants to sweep Trent's infidelity under the rug, just to keep the suburban mansion and the country club status intact. But I do not flinch. I do not raise my voice or show a single ounce of remorse or hesitation. I sip my wine and set the glass down gently on the marble counter. I lean forward, resting my elbows on the island, my eyes locking directly onto Vivian's through the digital feed. I let a cold, empty smile touch the corners of my mouth. I watch her righteous anger falter slightly under my dead steady stare. She realizes in that brief second that she has absolutely zero power over me anymore. "Mom," I say softly, my voice cutting through the sounds of Sydney sobbing uncontrollably in the background. "You might want to sit down for file number 3. Vivian does not sit down. She stands frozen, staring at the camera, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Behind her, Derek and Sydney are both pulling up the third attachment. Derek is the first to open it. His hands are trembling so violently, he drops the phone into his lap before picking it back up again. He reads the title of the document out loud, his voice a hollow echo of its former self. "Vivian blackmail 8,000 monthly." The PDF contains the exact bank ledgers I extracted from Trent's court filings. It highlights the precise 17 wire transfers made on the first of every single month for exactly $8,000. The receiving account is clearly labeled Vivian Grace Ministries. Derek stares at the screen, his mind desperately trying to process the financial data in front of his eyes. He looks up at his wife, his face contorted in confusion and growing horror. "Vivian, what is this charity?" he asks, his voice cracking. "Why is Trent paying you $8,000 every single month?" Vivian opens her mouth to speak, but she cannot form the words. Her pristine church lady facade is actively melting off her face, exposing the terrified, panicked woman underneath. Sydney stops thrashing against Trent long enough to look at the third file on her own phone. There is a hyperlink at the bottom of the PDF document. Sydney taps it with a shaking finger. The audio file begins to play immediately. She has her phone volume turned all the way up, and the sound of my mother's recorded voice suddenly fills the chaotic Miami living room, cutting through the heavy breathing and the tension. The recording is crystal clear. The ambient noise of Trent's leased Mercedes plays through the phone speakers, followed immediately by Vivian's sharp, venomous voice. Everyone in the room freezes completely. Sydney and Trent stop fighting. Derek stops breathing. They all listen as Vivian calmly tells Trent that she saw the text messages from Madison on his phone. They listen in absolute silence as she admits she knows all about the 24-year-old mistress and the secret luxury apartment across town. Sydney lets out a small whimpering gasp, covering her mouth with her hand, but she does not look away from her mother. Then, the audio reaches the brutal negotiation. My mother's recorded voice echoes through the silent room, demanding her compensation. You pay my charity $8,000 a month so I can keep up my status at the church and buy the things I deserve, and I will keep my mouth completely shut about your little blonde side piece. The recording captures Trent's terrified voice agreeing to the terms and explicitly stating he will manipulate Derek into mortgaging the family home to get the cash to pay her. The file ends with Vivian coldly stating she does not care how he gets the money as long as the check clears by the first of the month. The audio file stops playing. The living room is dead silent for exactly 3 seconds. Sydney slowly lowers her phone. She turns her head to look at her mother. All the manufactured anger toward me, the desperate defense of her husband, the carefully curated internet aesthetic, it all burns to ash in the span of 5 seconds. My mother sold out her golden child's marriage for designer hats and church clout. Sydney steps away from Trent, walking slowly toward Vivian. You knew, Sydney, whispers her voice breaking into 1,000 jagged pieces. You knew he was cheating on me with a pregnant girl, and you let me sleep next to him just so you could buy new dresses for Sunday service. Derek stands up from the white leather sectional. His knees are shaking so badly he can barely support his own weight. He looks at Vivian, the woman he has been married to for over 30 years. He realizes the full scope of the devastation. His wife allowed his wealthy savior son-in-law to completely bankrupt him, to steal the equity of his fully paid-off house just so she could extort hush money. Vivian threw her own husband into financial ruin to protect a fraudulent charity account. Derek lunges forward, grabbing a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurls it across the room. It smashes into the wall, shattering into dust. You let him steal my house! Vivian Derek screams, his voice tearing through his throat. You let him destroy my legacy for some damn hats. Vivian starts backing away, her hands raised defensively. She stammers, trying to invent a lie, trying to say she was protecting the family image, trying to say a divorce would have ruined them at the church. But nobody is listening to her anymore. Sydney lets out a blood-curdling scream and launches herself directly at her mother. She grabs Vivian by the collar of her expensive blouse, tearing the fabric as they crash into the glass coffee table. The table shatters under their weight, sending shards of glass flying across the plush carpet. Trent tries to run toward the front door to escape the violence, but Derek intercepts him, grabbing him by the collar of his designer polo shirt and shoving him violently against the wall. The living room descends into absolute visceral chaos. It is a war zone of their own making. They are screaming, crying, tearing each other apart like starved wolves fighting over the last scrap of meat. The illusion of their perfect affluent suburban life is entirely eradicated. The white savior is pinned against the wall by the man he defrauded. The golden child is violently attacking the mother who sold her out for status. The matriarch who demanded respect and obedience is shrieking on a floor covered in broken glass and spilled champagne. I sit comfortably in my Seattle penthouse thousands of miles away, completely untouched by the carnage. I lean back in my leather bar stool, resting my hands on the cool marble island. The glow of the laptop screen illuminates my face in the dark kitchen. I do not feel a single ounce of guilt or sadness. I do not shed a tear for the family I just annihilated. I watch the chaotic video feed on my screen like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. Every single microaggression, every time they treated me like a free domestic servant, every time they minimized my accomplishments to elevate their fake empire, it has all been paid back in full with brutal, unyielding interest. The absolute chaos in the Miami living room reaches a fever pitch. My father, Derek, is still pinning Trent against the wall, his hands gripping the collar of Trent's expensive polo shirt. Sydney is on the floor sobbing amidst the shattered glass of the coffee table, completely broken by the revelation of her husband's pregnant mistress. My mother, Vivian, is backed into a corner, her church lady facade entirely stripped away, exposing the terrified extortionist underneath. They are all screaming at each other, their voices overlapping into a deafening roar of mutual destruction. Suddenly, Trent manages to shove my father backward. Derek stumbles slightly, giving Trent the space he needs to break free. Trent does not run for the door. Instead, his face contorted with sheer desperation and rage. He lunges directly toward the webcam. He leans so close to the lens that his flushed, sweating face fills my entire laptop screen. He points a shaking finger directly at me, his eyes wild with the manic panic of a cornered fraud. "I am going to sue you for everything you have," Trent screams, his voice cracking under the strain. His spittle hits the camera lens on his end. "I am going to destroy your life, Alana. You hacked my private accounts. You stole confidential documents. I will hire the best lawyers in the country, and I will drag you into federal court. You are going to prison for cybercrimes, and I'm going to take every single penny you own. You ruined my marriage. You ruined my business. You are a dead woman." I sit perfectly still in my Seattle penthouse, letting his empty threats wash over me. I do not blink. I do not break eye contact with the camera. I simply reach forward and click the small microphone icon on my Zoom interface, unmuting myself for the first time since the carnage began. "You cannot afford a lawyer, Trent," I say, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that immediately slices through the screaming in the living room. The absolute certainty in my tone stops him cold. He freezes, staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. Behind him, Derek, Sydney, and Vivian also stop screaming, turning their heads to listen to the quiet, lethal authority in my voice. "You do not have a business, Trent." I continue, speaking with the clinical precision of a professional auditor delivering a final verdict. "You have a hollow shell company registered to a virtual mailbox in a strip mall. You have $150,000 in unsecured credit card debt. You have 3 pending lawsuits from contractors you refuse to pay. You cannot even afford the rent on your secret apartment across town without stealing from my father's retirement. So do not threaten me with lawyers you cannot afford to hire." Trent's face goes completely slack. The realization that I know absolutely everything about his pathetic financial reality completely paralyzes him. He has no leverage left, no lies left to spin. "And you should save your breath for the FBI," I add, leaning slightly closer to the camera. "I did not just hack your accounts, Trent. I legally accessed public financial records and subpoenaed court ledgers. The documents showing your fraudulent home equity loan, the one you manipulated my father into signing, while heavily misrepresenting the terms, constitutes federal wire fraud and elder financial exploitation. I packaged the deed, the ledger showing the hush money payments, and the falsified loan origination documents into a neat digital portfolio. I forwarded the entire file to the Federal Financial Crimes Division this morning. They already have it. They are already looking at it." Derek lets out a small, strangled gasp, leaning heavily against the wall for support. He realizes the magnitude of the legal nightmare his son-in-law has dragged him into. Vivian covers her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with terror, realizing her extortion scheme is now in the hands of federal investigators. "Oh, and one more thing," I say, my voice devoid of any human empathy. "I called your travel agent this afternoon. I informed them that the first-class flights and the overwater bungalow for your luxury anniversary trip to the Maldives were booked using a fraudulent credit line that is currently in default. The travel agency immediately ran a fraud check. Your entire trip has been canceled, Trent. The tickets are void, the reservation is gone. You are not going to the Maldives. You are going to federal prison." Sydney lets out another piercing wail, burying her face in her hands. The final illusion of her black girl magic aesthetic is officially dead. The luxury vacation, the wealthy husband, the perfect suburban life. It was all a grotesque lie built on stolen money and betrayal. I look at the screen surveying the wreckage of my biological family. They are bleeding, shattered, and completely exposed. The men who demanded my respect are broken frauds. The women who demanded my servitude are exposed extortionists and victims of their own vanity. They thought they could summon me across the country to scrub their patio and change diapers while they paraded around on stolen wealth. They thought they could use my silence and my compliance to fund their toxicity forever. You wanted a free housemaid? I say softly, delivering the final fatal blow. You got a forensic accountant. I do not wait for their response. I do not wait for the screaming to start again. I simply move my cursor to the bottom right corner of the screen and click the red button. Goodbye. The Zoom meeting ends instantly, cutting off their visual feed and plunging my apartment back into absolute silence. The dark screen of my laptop reflects my own face. I am perfectly calm. My breathing is steady. My heart rate is normal. The execution is complete. 72 hours pass. The world does not end. In fact, my world becomes brilliantly, vividly clear. I am sitting in the glass-walled conference room of my Seattle firm on a Wednesday morning. I am wearing a tailored charcoal suit, finalizing the asset recovery phase of a $50 million corporate embezzlement case. My colleagues are discussing settlement terms, and I am nodding along, perfectly engaged, perfectly professional. My personal phone, the one my family has been blowing up for 3 days, is powered down and locked inside the bottom drawer of my desk at home. I have not looked at it once since I clicked end meeting on that Zoom call. Instead, I have a cheap prepaid burner phone resting silently in my blazer pocket. Before I went dark, I forwarded all incoming calls from my parents and my sister to this untraceable number, setting it to automatically route to voicemail. I do not want to speak to them, but as a forensic accountant, I know the value of preserving the digital record of a collapsing enterprise. When the corporate meeting concludes, I walk back to my private office and lock the door. I pull the cheap plastic phone from my pocket. The screen is flashing with a staggering number of notifications. 94 voicemails in 3 days. I sit in my ergonomic leather chair and press the speaker button, listening to the chronological destruction of my toxic family unfold in grainy audio recordings. The first few messages from Sunday night are just screaming. Unintelligible rage and panic as they tried to process the nuclear bomb I dropped on their living room. But by Monday morning, the reality of the federal investigation begins to set in. My father, Derek, leaves a message, his voice sounding ancient and broken. Alana, he rasps, the sound of sirens wailing somewhere in the background. The FBI raided Trent's office this morning. They took computers and file boxes. They came to the house and asked me about the home equity loan. I told them the truth, Alana. I told them I did not know he was stealing it. I filed for divorce today. I packed your mother's designer clothes in garbage bags and threw them on the front lawn. She is gone. The bank sent the foreclosure notice via certified mail because the loan is in default. I am losing the house, Alana. I am losing everything I worked for my entire life. I delete the message without a flinch. The next significant audio file is from Sydney. The background noise is not the pristine quiet of her suburban mansion, but the loud rumbling of a cheap window air conditioning unit and children crying. Alana, please pick up the phone. Sydney begs, her voice entirely stripped of its black girl magic arrogance. The bank froze all our joint accounts. Trent's personal accounts are seized. His credit cards are declining everywhere. They arrested him at the country club yesterday for wire fraud. I had to pack the kids into the car and rent a room at a discount motel off the highway using the last bit of cash I had in my purse. Trent is in jail, Alana. He is calling me from a holding cell, asking me to find bail money, but I have absolutely nothing. The 24-year-old girl, The mistress, she gave an interview to a local blog saying Trent promised to leave me for her and that he bought her that apartment. My entire life is a joke. My followers are laughing at me online. Please, Alana, I need a loan to feed your nieces and nephews. I press delete. I do not feel a single pang of sympathy for the woman who threw a glass of red wine on me and demanded I serve her racist husband's friends. The final voice I listen to belongs to my mother, Vivian. It is recorded late Tuesday night. Her tone is a chaotic mixture of desperation and furious entitlement. Alana, you demonic child. Vivian hisses, her voice echoing as if she is sleeping in her car. Your father locked me out of the house. The pastor called an emergency meeting at the church and asked me to step down from the ministry board because the rumors about the blackmail money are spreading through the congregation. Someone leaked the audio file to the church group chat, and everyone knows I extorted my son-in-law to hide his pregnant mistress. I am a laughingstock. The aunties will not even look at me. I have nowhere to sleep. You have to wire me money right now so I can get a hotel. You owe me for giving birth to you. You are supposed to honor your mother. I let the voicemail play out until the automated voice tells me the message has ended. I highlight the entire inbox and hit delete all. The cheap plastic phone asks me to confirm the permanent deletion of 94 messages. I click yes. The inbox is empty. The digital storage is completely cleared. I stand up and walk over to the floor-to-ceiling window in my office, looking out at the Seattle skyline. The rain is falling in a steady, calming rhythm against the thick glass. I wait for the guilt to hit me. Society tells you that destroying your family should come with a heavy psychological price. Religion tells you that honoring your mother and father is a mandatory sacrifice, even when they are bleeding you dry. The world expects a black woman to carry the burdens of her community, to be the strong, silent mule who absorbs the trauma and fixes the broken men around her. But standing here in my tailored suit looking out over the city, I conquered. I feel absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated peace. I do not feel guilty for handing a thief over to the federal government. I do not feel guilty for letting a superficial sister experience the actual reality of the fraudulent life she chose to blindly defend. I do not feel guilty for letting a manipulative mother face the exact public humiliation she weaponized against me for 31 years. And I certainly do not feel guilty for letting a cowardly father lose the house he willingly mortgaged to buy the approval of a white con artist who treated his own daughter like domestic help. They were a malignant tumor that had been draining my energy, my self-worth, and my peace of mind since the day I was born. I spent decades trying to shrink myself to avoid aggravating the disease. But you cannot negotiate with a tumor. You cannot reason with a cancer that demands your slow death to sustain its own growth. You can only cut it out completely and brutally to save your own life. I have officially excised the tumor. The surgery was a complete success. I take a deep breath of the crisp, recycled air of my corporate office. I feel lighter than I have in 31 years. I turn my back to the window, walk over to my mahogany desk, and open my laptop to get back to work. Exactly 1 month passes since the digital execution. The federal investigation into Trent's fraudulent empire is public knowledge, now making headlines in Miami real estate blogs and local news. I do not read them. I am walking through the pristine glass and steel lobby of my Seattle corporate building on a rainy Tuesday morning, holding a matcha latte and reviewing a digital file on my tablet. The lobby is a massive echoing cavern of wealth and security. Professionals in tailored suits move purposefully past the front desk. The air smells like expensive espresso and floor wax. It is a world built on logic, numbers, and undeniable proof. I hear my name before I see her. Alana. The voice is thin, scratchy, and desperate. It lacks the booming, self-righteous authority of the church matriarch I grew up fearing. I stop walking and turn toward the visitor seating area near the security turnstiles. Standing there clutching a cheap, battered carry-on bag is my mother, Vivian. The visual shock of her appearance is staggering. The woman who stood in that Miami living room sipping champagne in a crisp designer blouse is completely gone. The Vivian standing in my corporate lobby looks like a hollowed-out shell. Her perfectly styled hair is flat and frizzy, showing harsh gray roots she can no longer afford to dye. She is wearing a faded, oversized sweater and cheap leggings that cling loosely to her diminished frame. Her designer purse has been replaced by a plastic shopping bag, holding a neck pillow and a half-empty bottle of water. The heavy church lady glamour, the expensive perfumes, the arrogant posture, they have all been aggressively stripped away by the brutal reality of her consequences. She looks exactly like a woman who has spent the last 4 weeks sleeping on the couches of reluctant relatives who secretly despise her until they finally kicked her out too. She steps toward me, her hands shaking visibly. "Alana, please," she says, her voice cracking as she tries to close the distance between us. The security guard at the front desk immediately stands up, placing a hand on his radio, but I hold up a single finger signaling him to wait. I want to hear exactly what kind of desperate manipulation she has dragged all the way across the country. "I flew standby all night," she whispers, her eyes darting around the expensive corporate lobby, taking in the marble floors and the towering glass walls. "It took me 3 days to get here sleeping in rigid airport chairs. Your father completely locked me out of our bank accounts before the federal agents froze them. The pastor officially excommunicated me from the congregation. Sydney will not even look at me. She blames me for everything that happened with Trent and that 24-year-old girl. I have absolutely nowhere left to go, Alana. You are my only daughter left." I stand perfectly still, holding my tablet against my chest. I do not offer her a hug. I do not offer her a tissue. I simply look at her, absorbing the pathetic reality of a woman who destroyed her own family for $8,000 a month. "You flew 3,300 miles to tell me you are homeless," I ask, my voice echoing slightly in the vast lobby. "What exactly do you expect me to do with that information, Vivian?" She flinches violently at the use of her first name. Tears spill over her eyelashes, cutting wet tracks through the cheap foundation she hastily applied in an airport bathroom. "I am your mother," she sobs, taking another desperate step forward. Her voice begins to rise, echoing off the glass walls, attempting to use public embarrassment to force my hand. "You have this massive job, Alana. You have a beautiful apartment in the city. You cannot just leave me on the street to starve. I gave birth to you. I raised you. The Bible says, 'Honor thy mother,' Alana. It is a sin to turn your back on your own flesh and blood when they are suffering. God is watching how you treat me right now." It is the exact same playbook she used for 31 years. Weaponizing religion to demand absolute submission, using the biological fact of my birth as a lifelong debt collection agency. Expecting me to absorb her trauma and fix her mistakes simply because I am the successful Black daughter who is supposed to endure it all in silence to protect the family image. I look her up and down, taking in the pathetic, desperate image of a woman who traded her family for hush money and designer hats. The silence stretches between us, heavy and suffocating for her, but incredibly liberating for me. "You honored your greed over your husband, your daughter, and your own soul," I say, my voice slicing through her manufactured tears with absolute lethal precision. "You sold out Sydney's marriage to buy status at a church that just kicked you out. You let Derek sign away his retirement to a white con artist so you could extort hush money. You stood in that living room a month ago and called me a bitter failure while spending stolen money that was actively destroying your own family." She opens her mouth to protest, to formulate another lie, but I do not let her speak. "You are not my mother," I continue, my eyes locking onto hers with a cold, terrifying emptiness. "You are just a woman who lost her blackmail leverage. And now that the money has dried up and the fraud is exposed, you want to use the Bible to extort housing out of the daughter you treated like a free domestic servant. God might be watching, Vivian, but He is watching you reap the exact harvest you planted. I am not saving you from your own consequences." Her jaw drops. The reality of my absolute rejection hits her with the force of a physical blow. She realizes that the guilt trip has completely failed. The religious manipulation has zero effect. The public setting is not embarrassing me. It is only highlighting her own pathetic downfall. She lets out a loud, wailing sob, reaching out to grab the sleeve of my tailored suit. I do not even blink. I take one step back out of her reach and turn my head toward the security desk. Marcus, I call out, my voice projecting clearly across the lobby. This woman is trespassing and she is harassing employees. Please escort her off the premises immediately and flag her face in the building security system. If she returns, call the police. The tall, broad-shouldered security guard is out from behind the desk in seconds. He steps between me and Vivian, placing a firm professional hand on her shoulder. Mom, you need to leave the building right now, he says, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Vivian screams my name as Marcus turns her toward the revolving glass doors. She fights against his grip, dragging her cheap carry-on bag across the polished marble floor. Alana, you cannot do this, she shrieks, her voice cracking with raw, visceral panic. I am your mother. I am your mother. I do not turn around. I do not watch her get pushed out into the cold Seattle rain. I simply turn on my heel, walk toward the secure elevator bank and scan my corporate badge. The glass doors slide open with a soft mechanical hiss. I step inside, press the button for the top floor, and watch the lobby disappear as the elevator shoots upward into the sky. I take a sip of my matcha latte. It is still perfectly warm. The rainy Seattle afternoon is perfectly quiet inside my office. The burner phone sitting in my desk drawer vibrates against the polished wood. It is an unknown prepaid number flashing on the cracked digital screen. I almost do not answer it, but the forensic accountant in me always likes to close out a ledger completely. I swipe the green button and bring the cheap plastic device to my ear without saying a word. Alana, is that you? The voice is small and brittle, and it sounds like it has been dragged over miles of broken glass. It is Sydney. The background noise coming through the speaker is not the soft classical music of her former suburban mansion, or the clinking of crystal glasses at a wealthy country club. It is the unmistakable, harsh electronic beeping of a retail cash register and the dull, buzzing hum of mall conversations. Customers are arguing in the distance and a manager is shouting over a loudspeaker. Sydney tells me she is hiding in a supply closet on her 15-minute break. She says she is working at a discount clothing store in a rundown strip mall just to buy groceries for the kids. She sounds physically and spiritually exhausted. The confident, arrogant influencer who wore custom silk gowns and bragged about her curated aesthetic is completely gone. The reality of her consequences has crushed her carefully constructed digital facade into absolute dust. She tells me she had to sell her designer bags to a pawn shop just to keep the lights on in her tiny rented apartment. Trent is sitting in a federal holding facility, waiting for his trial on wire fraud charges, and the bank seized absolutely everything they owned. Then comes the inevitable pivot. Sydney starts crying softly into the receiver. She tells me she needs a divorce lawyer to formally separate herself from Trent's criminal charges and the massive civil lawsuits piling up against his empty shell companies. She says the public defender is not helping her, and she is terrified the federal government will come after her retail wages to pay back the victims. She asks me for a loan. Just $10,000. She begs, her voice cracking. She promises she will pay me back $10 a week if she has to. She calls me her big sister. She says she knows we had our differences in the past, but blood is blood, and we have to stick together when things get hard. I sit back in my heavy leather chair and look out at the gray clouds rolling over the Puget Sound. I let her finish her desperate, pathetic pitch. I do not feel the familiar tug of sisterly obligation. I do not feel the heavy church guilt that my mother spent 31 years trying to program into my brain. I just hear a woman who is finally experiencing the natural and unavoidable consequences of her own terrible choices. Sydney, I say, my voice perfectly calm and level. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a victim of your own greed. You let a mediocre white man with maxed-out credit cards treat your own sister like an unpaid servant because his fake wealth bought your absolute silence. You stood in your foyer 2 years ago and watched him call me domestic help in front of his racist friends. You threw a glass of red wine on my chest and demanded I apologize to him for ruining your aesthetic moment. She sobs louder through the phone, telling me she was manipulated by him too. She claims she did not know the money was stolen from our father's retirement account. She says she thought Trent was a real estate genius and that she was just trying to build a beautiful, successful life for her children. She plays the ultimate victim card, claiming she was blinded by love and naive to his financial crimes. I cut her off immediately. Ignorance is not an excuse for cruelty, Sydney. You did not care where the money came from as long as it kept flowing into your bank account. You gladly stepped on my neck to elevate yourself. You used cultural buzzwords to mask the fact that you were entirely dependent on a fraud who actively disrespected Black women. You loved the illusion of wealth more than you loved your own sister. You loved the status and the country club dinners more than you loved the truth. You enabled his abuse because it was financially convenient for you. I am not your safety net anymore, Sydney, I continue, my words dropping like heavy stones into the digital connection. I am not the scapegoat you can use to absorb your trauma. I am not the bank you can rob when your scam falls apart. You wanted to be a luxury lifestyle influencer. Well, now you get to influence your own way out of a retail uniform and federal court hearings. You have to save yourself now because nobody is coming to rescue you. You wanted the benefits of his fake empire, so now you get to carry the weight of his real debts. She screams my name through the phone, begging me not to hang up. She tells me I am sentencing her to ruin. She says the family is completely broken, and it is all my fault for exposing the truth. I tell her she sentenced herself the day she decided my dignity was the price of her admission into a fake high society lifestyle. The family was always broken. Sydney, I say softly. I just finally turned on the lights so everyone could see the rot. I pull the phone away from my ear. I do not wait for her to stop crying. I do not wait for another desperate plea for cash. I tap the red button and end the call. The line goes dead and the room returns to absolute perfect silence. I open the back panel of the cheap prepaid phone and pull out the battery. I slide the small plastic SIM card out of its tray. It sits in the palm of my hand, representing the very last tether to a life of servitude and disrespect. I snap the card cleanly in half with my fingers, feeling the plastic break under the pressure. I toss the broken pieces and the burner phone into the metal trash can under my desk. The last physical tie to the toxic ecosystem of my biological family is officially severed. They can never reach me again. They cannot call, they cannot text, they cannot demand my time or my money or my peace of mind. The ghost they created out of me has finally vanished for good. I sit in the quiet peace of my office, breathing in the clean air, and turn back to my computer screen to finish my work. 6 months pass in a blur of absolute undisturbed tranquility. The silence that follows the eradication of my biological family is not lonely. It is the rich, fertile silence of a cleared forest floor ready for new growth. In late October, I walk into the executive boardroom of my Seattle firm, and I do not leave as a senior accountant. I leave as a full equity partner. My colleagues stand up and applaud when the managing director announces my promotion. They do not applaud because of my proximity to a wealthy white man, or because I fit a curated internet aesthetic. They applaud because my brain, my work ethic, and my relentless forensic precision secured a massive victory for the firm and brought in millions of dollars in legitimate revenue. The promotion comes with a compensation package that changes the trajectory of my entire life. I do not buy a flashy leased sports car or a custom silk gown to impress people who secretly hate me. Instead, I close on a stunning mid-century modern home perched directly on the edge of the Puget Sound. The property features massive floor-to-ceiling glass walls that wrap around the back of the house, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the dark, rolling water and the distant snow-capped Olympic Mountains. The deed is in my name alone. There are no shell companies and no fraudulent co-signers. It is a fortress of my own making, built entirely on the foundation of my own undeniable merit. Tonight, I am hosting a dinner party to celebrate the new house and the partnership. The contrast between this evening and that humiliating Thanksgiving in Miami 2 years ago is incredibly sharp. I am not standing in a sweltering kitchen wearing a stained apron. I am not basting a turkey while my mother snaps her fingers at me and demands that I hurry up. Instead, I am wearing a beautiful dark green cashmere sweater that perfectly complements my deep brown skin. I am holding a crystal glass of expensive Cabernet, not carrying a heavy tray of water glasses for racist country club friends who view me as domestic help. My kitchen is filled with the warm sound of genuine laughter and the smell of roasted garlic and fresh herbs. I hired a private executive chef and a small catering staff for the evening because I refuse to ever be treated like unpaid labor again. The people gathered in my home are my chosen family. They are senior partners who mentored me through the grueling ranks of corporate finance. They are close friends who sat with me during the early days when I lived in a microscopic studio apartment, eating instant noodles and studying for my certification exams. They are intelligent, driven, successful Black women who do not need to fake their magic for social media likes because their magic is rooted in actual substance and reality. They celebrate my promotions, they value my intellect, and they treat my presence as a gift rather than a lifelong obligation. We sit around the large dining table sharing stories and toasting to new beginnings. Nobody mentions duty or sacrifice. Nobody demands obedience or threatens my peace of mind. There is only mutual respect and authentic, unwavering support. As the dinner winds down and my friends move into the living room to share a second bottle of wine, I excuse myself and step out onto the expansive wooden balcony. The late autumn Seattle air is crisp and biting against my skin, but it feels incredibly grounding. The dark water of the Puget Sound crashes rhythmically against the rocky shoreline far below. I lean against the thick glass railing, taking a slow, deep breath of the salty, pine-scented air. I take a sip of my Cabernet, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. My phone, the only phone I own now, vibrates softly in the pocket of my slacks. I pull it out and look at the glowing screen. It is a custom news alert I set up months ago using the federal court docket tracking system. The notification banner flashes across the glass with clinical legal precision. The headline is clear and completely devoid of emotion. Trent has officially been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for multiple counts of wire fraud and elder financial exploitation. The federal judge firmly denied his legal team's request for a reduced sentence or house arrest and ordered him to surrender to a federal penitentiary facility by the end of next week. There is no bailout for the white savior. His fake empire is reduced to an orange jumpsuit and a concrete cell. A second alert pops up immediately below it, pulling data directly from the Miami-Dade County Property Appraiser database. The suburban house belonging to Derek and Vivian, the house they proudly mortgaged to buy hush money and fake status, has officially been sold at a public foreclosure auction to a corporate real estate conglomerate. They have completely lost the property, their equity, and their entire generational legacy. They are officially homeless and penniless, left with nothing but the ruins of the lies they chose to protect. The karma is absolute and mathematically flawless. The universe balanced the ledger with brutal perfection, returning every single ounce of their cruelty right back to their own front door. I read the headlines one more time, feeling the last microscopic ghost of my past evaporate into the cold night air. There is no anger left inside me. There is no lingering resentment or desire for revenge. The execution is finished, and the books are permanently closed. I smile a genuine warm smile that reaches all the way to my eyes. I lock my phone, slide it back into my pocket, and take one last look at the dark, beautiful water stretching out into the horizon. I turn my back on the cold and walk back inside toward the light. The laughter and the warmth of my real family fade to black. The most powerful lesson from this story is that biological loyalty should never be a blank check for abuse. Society often conditions us to believe that family is everything, But sharing DNA does not excuse exploitation, manipulation, or blatant cruelty. True empowerment arrives the exact moment you stop trying to prove your worth to toxic people who are committed to misunderstanding you. By walking away and building her own empire, Alana proved that setting unbreakable boundaries isn't an act of betrayal, it is absolute survival. Your peace of mind is your most valuable asset, and you owe nothing to those who only value your servitude. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more empowering content.